Tell us more about the significance of SACU and what it means overall. We're now joined by SACU's Executive Secretary, Ms. Paulina Elago, who said the facility was created to to establish an enabling environment necessary to execute the custom union's mandate. Good morning, Ms. Paulina. Welcome to Good Morning Namibia.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Well, maybe you can just, obviously it's 2015, just signify to us the importance of SACU in this contemporary context since its establishment in 1910.
Good question, and very important one indeed. Well, as the oldest customs union in the world, as you mentioned, really the objective is to deepen regional integration between the 5 member states. And as a customs union, we promote free movement of goods between the member states. It's a common customs area, which means really goods move freely, which means therefore you have access to a larger market of a combined population of all member states. So that in itself is quite critical, because then when you're talking about traders, producers of goods, the most important thing that anyone would want is to have goods moving freely across borders without unnecessary barriers to trade.
Okay. Well, we obviously know that there's 5 states involved in SACU, but we know that the leaders hadn't been meeting over the last 2 years. What are the actual reasons behind the leaders waiting until the inauguration of the new building to come together?
Well, I mean, it's not that they haven't been meeting, because, I mean, clearly other institutions of SACU have been meeting. The heads of states have agreed on a 6-point priority area, and there's been movement in some areas and not in others. And really, what they sought to do at their discussion, which was really an informal discussion, was to take stock of where we are at and where we need to move to going forward. And that's important because then, I mean, you mentioned earlier, the context has, in the global context, the regional context has changed. And so we need to also adapt to those changes to make ourselves relevant as an organization. And so heads of states, therefore, have directed the Council of Ministers to really, look at the future of SACU, reassess and reevaluate with a view to reinvigorate the 6 priorities that have been agreed upon, but considering the context, regional and global, that has also undergone major changes. And so we need to make sure that we remain relevant as an organization within those changing regional and global environments.
But what seems to be happening is, obviously because of the size of the South African economy, a lot of the South Africans, exactly because of the global pressures that are on the South African economy, are advocating for change in the formulas that dispensate revenues between the states. What is SACU's position on this, with obviously the Minister of Finance in Namibia and a lot of the other smaller states stating that, they're going to lose revenue?
Well, I mean, that's a reality, and the review of the revenue sharing formula is one of the priorities in any case, so it's nothing new at all. But it's how to go about it, and of course, yes, member states, especially the smaller economy, derive a lot of revenues from the SACU revenues, and so it's important for their economies. I mean, we're talking about 48, between 34 and 48 in some cases, depending on the year. So that's significant. And so if you're changing that, how do you change it to make sure that no one is worse off? And in fact, heads of states or member states have agreed that in reviewing the revenue sharing formula, no one should be worse off. And so we therefore have to find a way to make sure that that principle is maintained. And given the importance of the revenue sharing formula, it is indeed a politically, sensitive issue, but also one that really has to take into account everybody's interests.
But how far does the SACU, for instance, the sharing of revenue formula, how far does that affect the other aspects of SACU or other SADC issues as well? I mean, if we're looking at, for instance, imports of South African products into a lot of these smaller states, a lot of South African products have access to these states precisely because of things like the trade agreements between these countries. So what are the trade-offs and what are the other key priority areas that you're talking about? You mentioned 6. We know that the sharing of revenues is one, but what are the other aspects? Because obviously South Africa benefits because it's largely more industrial by exporting a lot of its products to these states. So where do we compromise and what do we compromise on?
I'm glad you're asking that question because, the tendency is to think of SACU as a revenue sharing arrangement, which is really not the case. We're doing good work in other areas. The area of trade facilitation, for example, which is very critical to remove barriers and to reduce the cost of trade and also the time it takes to move goods across the borders, which is critical, and this is where everybody else can benefit from. And we really engage in a program that seeks to do just that, whether it's easing of border crossing by harmonizing documentations for customs, which is critical in terms of reducing the cost of trade. I mean, if you think of a small trader who has to fill in numbers of documents, it takes time, it takes resources to do that. And so if you're streamlining that, it becomes quite easier to do so. And then again, as a union, we engage in trade negotiations with third parties as a collective. And what that does again is to ensure that we have market access for our exports into markets of those countries. Now, as a union, doing that as a collective allows producers to source inputs from within the union and produce a good that will be exported elsewhere, and it will qualify for benefits in terms of tariff concessions. So that's a good advantage as well. So really there are other areas and opportunity for us as a customs union to actually look at other areas. The whole issue of industrialization, cross-border cooperations in terms of infrastructure and other areas are all areas that we are looking at going forward. And I think that's where we can derive more benefits than just looking at a revenue sharing arrangement.
And obviously that's been a big concern if you read the recent media reports analyzing, SACU. So from a cost-benefit analysis, is SACU still relevant? And what do you think is going to be its significant contributing factor? What are the benefits of SACU? And what are the costs to especially the smaller states like Namibia of being part of a union like SACU?
I think if you listen to the statements that were made during the inauguration, a lot of that spoke to a reaffirmation of member states' commitments to SACU. SACU is relevant. It's an economic arrangement between member states, which makes it easier for member states to trade amongst themselves. I mean, I always try to just draw attention to a simple example. If Namibia were to close off or to introduce duties between itself and South Africa, what that will do to traders, and also the other way around, because we're used to free movement of goods, and it may seem simple, but really when you think about it, you will find trucks probably being held up at borders because now everybody must pay duty, but also the fact that you have to pay duties on goods that are coming in. Simple as it may seem, I think the convenience of customs union and the free movement of goods amongst the union makes it easier, but also just the promotion of economic development. Of course, when you are, in association with economically unequal partners, there's always going to be costs and costs for smaller economies. But then I think in the long run, one has to look at the opportunities and the benefits that an arrangement like this provides. And being able to collectively coordinate efforts economically. I think we can certainly do better. We haven't done as well. And this is where the foresight and the vision that heads of states have actually through the establishment of the 6 priority areas comes in, because it's industrial development, it's trade facilitation, it's a review of the revenue sharing formula, exactly to not just look at the revenue sharing formula. The customs union as a revenue arrangement is a question of trade in services. Again, it's broadening the scope away from what is traditionally seen as a revenue sharing arrangement.
So in conclusion, what is your message to the people that are more critical about SACU's role and how it's going to contribute towards the economic development of the smaller states like our country. What's your message to them?
My message is really to say that SACU is relevant. We need to obviously review and to think about the relevance of SACU within the context of changing economic and global and regional changes. But the benefits for a customs union, the fact that you have access to a larger market within the context of the 5 member states and economies that are integrated, makes it all relevant, and establish functioning customs union, which we don't see in the African context especially. There's a lot that we can share in terms of lessons of our own experiences, but also there's room for us to improve in terms of what we can do better to promote economic developments for our countries and people.
Okay. Do you think, just as a question of interest, that the official inauguration of the new headquarters is a symbol that SACU is going nowhere?
Absolutely. It's here to stay, and I think President Zuma made that point very clearly as a chairperson of SACU.
Okay, Ms. Paulina Elago, thank you very much for coming in and articulating the position of SACU and its future.
Thank you. You're most welcome.
Namibia, there you heard it from the lady that is the Executive Secretary of SACU, Ms. Paulina Elago, telling us that SACU is here to stay, acknowledging that obviously we've done a lot and it's actually beneficial to smaller states like Namibia, even though there is room for important critical analysis there